Thanks everyone for coming, and I echo, I can't remember who said this is the coldest night ever. I would not have left my house for a free event, so bless you all for coming. Okay. When I was a little girl, or so I am told, I always asked, why? Who says? How do you know? How do you know? That is not so simple a question as it sounds. When I was in the fourth grade, I have a very vivid memory of my teacher, the horrible Mrs. Davis, telling me with great authority that life could not exist on any other planet besides our own. And I thought, how do you know? How can you or anyone possibly know what the entire universe is capable of? As I grew older and more contemplative, I developed a conviction that it is precisely this form of knowledge acquisition, knowledge that always traces back to some outside authority, as the probable root of God as we imagine it in the Judeo-Christian tradition. If all knowledge comes from without, then surely there must be some ultimate source. And yet, I thought, a deer knows without being taught what plants it cannot eat. A bird knows how, when, and where to migrate. A dog knows when it is going to die and finds a quiet, dark place. What ways of knowing, then, might come from within rather than without? Did humans once possess such knowledge? Had all of our learning and culture eclipsed it or estranged it from us in some way? In 2013, I had a crisis of faith with academic knowledge while working on my first book. I discovered anatomical museums a few years earlier, museums like the well-known Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. I was most especially fascinated by the wax models I saw there, artful, hyper-real, and somehow very poignant. The so-called, or what I so-call, Sistine Chapel of anatomical waxes is La Specola in Florence, Italy. There one finds what is called the anatomical Venus. The anatomical Venus is almost impossible for a contemporary mind to grasp its head around. Made in the 18th century to teach the general public about human anatomy, she is a life-sized, anatomized wax woman with real human hair and eyelashes, Venetian glass eyes, and richly translucent skin. The most iconic anatomical Venus is dissectable into 7 anatomically correct layers, while others are in a permanent and provocative state of auto-dissection. The anatomical Venus drew me in, and I became obsessed, and I did what anyone in this questionable state would do. I went down the rabbit hole. I made pilgrimages to see and photograph every anatomical Venus I had read about. And I discovered on my travels yet more, this one from a fairground museum. I read every book and article I could get my hands on, and in the process amassed a library I ended up opening to the public. I perused old catalogs, I interviewed curators and keepers, and before long I knew as much as any scholar on the subject, maybe more because most scholars stick to the area of medical history, and this thing really spans quite a lot of disciplines. But when I sat down with all of these wonderful facts, I had to acknowledge to myself a very strange feeling. It was a creeping sense of dissatisfaction and disappointment. All of this knowledge, though very truly fascinating and also undeniably important, did not alone get me where I wanted to go, which begged the question, a question I'd never asked myself before, where did I want to go? When I saw the anatomical Venus for the first time, it blew my mind. It made no sense. I was enthralled. Who had created her? For what use? How could she have made perfect sense in her own time and place, but now only a little over 200 years been rendered utterly bizarre? My readings gave me a lot of information, very interesting and important information, but did not in any real way quench the longing to know that had set me on this path. I had never before had reason to question academic knowing. I come from a family of doctors, scientists, and lawyers. I studied history at university, and I even flirted with the idea of grad school. But I found to my surprise that all of this traditional knowledge left me ultimately empty. I had exhausted the traditional means of knowledge acquisition, and I had gone as far as I could go. Now what? About 10 years earlier, a friend had gifted me a copy of Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols, and I remember at the time being very struck by it, and his take on the importance of images and their effect on us. For him, an image that intrigues that elicits passion in the viewer is a thing to be taken very seriously. In his philosophy, images live and have the ability to heal. They are a pre-verbal form of understanding that circumvents rational knowing or direct language. Revelations of a truth not yet directly knowable to the conscious mind. My return to Jung gave me a useful framework which allowed me, in ways that are naturally impossible to rationally explain, to approach the Venus in a different way and to go deeper. And his approach helped me to find a means to investigate what it was that made it resonate, to circle around her through the way the book was structured, the style of the language, the interaction of image and words, to showcase and communicate what made her so fascinating without destroying the magic by too vigorous a dissection. As I worked on the anatomical Venus, the book became, seemingly by necessity, less an academic study and more of a poetic evocation, though very rigorously based on knowledge and facts. I began to see the anatomical Venus as an object lesson, one of the many places where we, as described by the visionary artist and poet William Blake, might be able to see the world in a grain of sand. In our culture, book and academic learning are the primary accepted ways of knowing. That which cannot be repeated, that for which we have no proof, is disregarded as having no meaning whatsoever. And what we are taught as truths are usually not truths that can be known to us directly, or at least are not known to us directly. Instead, they are culturally accepted beliefs taken on faith. E equals MC squared, the theory of evolution, how a car engine runs or an airplane flies. And we all know in our hearts that it is precisely these unprovable and unrepeatable things, beauty, love, a sense of mystery, that make life worth living in the first place. As a writer, what I feel when I'm honest with myself is that the act of writing is more akin to mediumship or channeling than creation as we understand it. By now, I know the drill. I recognize my object of passion and I follow it down the rabbit hole. I read all I can. I obsessively collect images. I talk to friends. I do yoga. I go on long walks. I make pilgrimages to special sites related to my obsession. And then, if I have patience, something happens. Eventually, when I sit down to write, something comes out. And often the realizations seem to come via the very act of writing itself. But from whence does it come? Creative production is very truly a mystery. Don't all of us who work in the arts have to confess that we believe a little in magic? Do not the ancients' ideas of enthusiasm and inspiration as gifts of the gods and muses speak to us, if only metaphorically? At the end of the day, I can say that the work I produce feels less like my own than the product of some impersonal process that works with and through me to produce something I had never foreseen. This is the image that sums up artistic creation to me. Appropriately enough, it is a sort of science age image of the Virgin Mary's Annunciation. She's holding a radiolaria, a one-celled creature, which brings up a thought that maybe the drive behind the desire to know is not so far off from the biblical definition of to know. Next one. This drive to know is not a cold drive. It is a passionate drive. It is a deep longing that seeks a union with the beloved other through understanding and knowledge and emerging, a knowing within and without that unifies us with the object of our devotion, a sort of Song of Solomon in which nature falls in love with herself through the vehicle of our own mysterious consciousness. And this line of thinking brings me to another lesson that the anatomical Venus taught me, which is the non-dualism between sacred and profane love, but that is a story for another day. Thank you.